On the 27th of September in 1994, the MS Estonia departed from the port of Tallinn. About 6 hours later, almost everyone on board was dead. Considered one of the worst maritime disasters of the 20th century, the sinking of the MS Estonia also remains one of the greatest unsolved mysteries of our time.
This cabin is clear.
Roger. We've got some paper bag, and it's full of, I don't know what it's full of, but we've got a paper bag in it. It's difficult to say if actually anybody was in this cabin at them. Oh yeah, we've got some food in it. There's a fair chart, a purse.
To this day, many people question the official story, claiming that the ship was sunk in extremely suspicious circumstances. But why is this incident viewed with such suspicion? How many people actually lost their lives? And what are these alternative conspiracy theories put forth by modern researchers? Let's find out.
With 51 million people entering another
surveillance camera capturing the
unidentified flying object.
lockdowns and mass testing.
Today, that the world is going to end.
Built in 1980, the MS Estonia was a cruise ferry, a combination of a cruise ship and a ferry. Before sinking, it sailed under names like Viking Sally, Silja Star, and Wasa King. During these early years, the ship was no stranger to controversy. In 1985, a passenger was stabbed 5 times in the throat with a dinner knife by Rieho Hamar, a man later described as the most dangerous criminal in Finland. After stabbing his victim, Hamar proceeded to strangle him to death with a strip of fabric, just to be sure. Hamar then escaped from prison, shooting a guard with a sawed-off shotgun and going on a crime spree for the next few years. Amazingly, he was then pardoned by President Tarja Halonen. 2 years later, in 2006, another murder took place on the ship. 2 West German tourists were attacked by a mysterious assailant and were discovered with mysterious injuries in a puddle of their own blood on the ship's deck. 1 tourist did not survive her head injuries, while the other managed to pull through. To this day, Finnish investigators have not been able to find the killer, and the murderer remains unsolved. While this has nothing to do with the sinking of MS Estonia, it does show that the ship had a dark past. Some might even say it was unlucky or cursed. In 1993, the ship was sold to Nordstrom and Thulin and began ferrying people from Tallinn to Stockholm. On September 27th of 1994, the MS Estonia left Tallinn with a total of 989 people, consisting of 803 passengers and 186 crew members. The vast majority of the passengers were Swedes, and the ship was fully loaded with cargo. The first sign of trouble appeared when the ship began listing to starboard due to poor cargo distribution. The seas were rough that night, and the wind speeds reaching 45 miles per hour. At about 1 a.m., the Estonia was traveling at about 26 kilometers per hour when passengers and crew heard a loud metallic bang. The official theory is that this was caused by a wave hitting the bow doors, but when the crew inspected them, no issues were found. Nevertheless, the noises continued, and by 1:15 a.m., the loading ramp was torn completely open. Water flooded the vehicle deck, and the ship began to lean heavily to the starboard side. Over the next hour or so, the ship continued to list more and more. An alarm was sounded at about 1:20 a.m., but at that point, it was too late. The ship was listing so hard to one side that people couldn't reach the boat deck to abandon ship. Cabin windows were shattered by heavy waves, and the Estonia truly began to flood with water. It was at this point that the Estonia began to sink, and it did so rapidly.
Estonia, what's going on? Can you reply?
This is Estonia. Kuka se on siellä? Euroopa Estonia.
Yes, Estonia, this is still Europe.
Hyvää huomenta, puhutko sä suomea?
Joo, puhun suomea.
Joo, meillä on nyt tässä ongelma. On paha kallistuma oikealle puolelle. Uskon, että oli 30 astetta. Voisitko sä tulla apuun ja pyytää myös Viking Linein apun?
Joo, Viking Line on tässä perässä ja meni varmaan tietoon. Voitko antaa sun position?
Siis meillä meillä on blackout ja emme saa nyt, mä en osaa sanoa sitä.
Okei, selvä, ryhdytään toimiin.
The crew desperately called for help, but they panicked and failed to adhere to the proper international formats. When they did get in contact with another vessel, the crew couldn't provide their location due to a power failure. At about 1:50 a.m., the ship disappeared from radar entirely, sinking in international waters near Uto Island. The Estonia was apparently completely sideways when it went down, with a list of about 90 degrees. Soon enough, it was 85 meters underwater. Another ferry called the Mariella was the first to arrive at the scene at about 2:12 a.m., and it was able to save many of the passengers waiting on life rafts. Helicopters and more ferries then arrived to save more of the survivors. But it was immediately clear to everyone that the vast majority of those on board the Estonia had died.
Rescuers reach for shivering survivors as they struggle to grip an overturned life raft. More than 900 people die as the ferry Estonia capsizes in freezing water off the coast of Finland. Despite dozens of search aircraft and ships, only 141 people are rescued. Again and again, searchers find only damaged rafts and empty life jackets, floating grave markers. Surviving crew members report flooding in the ship's car deck, and pictures of the sunken ferry show damage to the bow door. The possibility of a design flaw prompts stepped-up ferry inspections and a possible ban on ships of the same type as the Estonia.
Only 138 people were rescued, out of a total of 989, and one survivor later died in the hospital. This means that the total death count was 852. Only the sinking of the Titanic and the RMS Empress of Ireland resulted in more deaths during peacetime. Most of the victims lost their lives due to drowning and hypothermia in the cold Nordic seas. In fact, many people made it to the life rafts only to die of hypothermia before helicopters could arrive. As you might expect, most survivors were young men, while few seniors survived. No children under the age of 12 made it out. Approximately 650 people were still inside the ship when it sank to the bottom of the ocean. So what actually caused this maritime disaster? In 2011, a diving team examined the wreck in great detail with the help of underwater vehicles, and they came to the conclusion that the bow doors had failed to withstand the heavy waves. After these doors tore open, the vehicle deck flooded with water, causing the ship to capsize and sink. The crew was also accused of ineptitude, especially since they failed to slow down after hearing the loud banging noises and delayed in sounding the alarm. Accusations were also hurled at the German dockyard that built the Estonia, with claims that they failed to create a ship that could handle the rough Nordic seas. The official story has failed to convince many people, leading to a number of conspiracy theories. In 2020, Swedish filmmakers revisited the wreck and filmed it with underwater equipment. They discovered a mysterious hole in the side of the hull that was 4 meters wide. The resulting documentary caused quite a stir, sparking a new investigation. The lead investigator eventually concluded that the ship must have collided with a submarine. but the Estonian government claimed that the hole was too small to cause the vessel to sink so quickly. Interestingly, the documentary filmmakers faced charges for violating the sanctity of the wreck, but were eventually acquitted. It was almost like the government didn't want people to see what was down there. Another conspiracy theory revolves around some kind of explosion that occurred inside the vessel. Lab tests were conducted on debris from the Estonia, and traces of explosives were allegedly discovered. But if that's true, then how did explosives end up inside the Estonia? This is where it starts to get interesting. In 2004, a former Swedish customs officer claimed that the Estonia was being used to smuggle military equipment across international waters. The Swedish and Estonian governments later confirmed that there was in fact military equipment on board at the time of the crash, but it was non-explosive. But why would the Estonia, a passenger ferry, be carrying military equipment in the first place? Remember, this was 1994. The Soviet Union had just fallen, and the nation of Estonia had possession of all kinds of Soviet weaponry. This hardware had essentially been abandoned by the Russians, and some say it was being smuggled out of the country to be sold on the black market. Some even suggest that the Estonia was carrying some kind of top-secret Soviet weapon when it sank. There are those who claim that this Soviet weaponry didn't actually explode inside the ship, but that the Russians knew it was being smuggled out of the country. In order to prevent it from falling into the wrong hands, a Russian submarine fired torpedoes at the Estonia, destroying the top-secret weaponry and killing most of the passengers in the process. Others have claimed that a Swedish submarine caused the entire incident, presumably by accidentally crashing into the Estonia. It's difficult to put your finger on, but things just don't seem to add up. Why were the bodies of the victims never recovered? Why do Estonian and Swedish authorities seem so protective about the wreck, to the point where anyone who investigates faces criminal charges? Let's face it, the official story raises many questions. How could heavy waves rip open the bay doors? Was the MS Estonia really designed so poorly? And what about the giant hole found in the side of the hull? That one was never fully explained. Perhaps there was secret weaponry, and it was stolen by another entity. Or perhaps we will never know the truth. One thing is for sure though, hundreds of people died in this maritime disaster, and their families deserve clear answers.